I think I have something interesting to show you. I just returned from Naperville, Illinois. That's a suburb of Chicago, pretty good sized city. I've been up there very few times. But I received an email from a young man by the name of Charlie, and he said he had a rotary table that I could have, and I went up there and picked it up. He said it's not in real good shape, and it isn't, but it's a 10-inch. And it's made by the Walter Company, which is German. See if I can pan in on that a little bit. And it's mighty cold today. Winter is coming. It's almost the middle of November, so you can see I got a jacket out. And this is one of the last times I'll be out in my garage. But there are several parts that came with it, and it had been disassembled partially, and I don't know why. But perhaps this will be a video that I can make in regards to some rust removal and then restoration if it's not too far gone and everything is there. But you can see they already had the table off, and I was glad because it's light enough for me to move around. There's a ring gear there, and let's see. And that ring gear, of course, is a worm gear. There's a couple breakouts here of the casting, right here and here, where somebody over tightened and damaged it, perhaps years ago, I don't know. The crank here works fine. It turns the worm, but the engagement of the worm into the worm gear doesn't seem to be working. It needs freeing up. I hope I can free it up by soaking it or whatever. And but it looks like it might be a fun project. It's still got the keys or the lugs on the bottom side. So we'll be seeing this in later videos. And thank you, Charlie, who wants to study to be a machinist in one of the junior colleges up there. And had a nice South Bend lathe. I had a good conversation with him. And thank you, Charlie, ever so much for this. And I hope you will see this in working condition someday. Probably not real soon, but this will be a winter project. Well, howdy, it's tubalcain again, and several months have passed since the introductory was shot out in my garage on the rotary table. So now it's the middle of January. It's incredibly cold outside in northern Illinois. So I'm down in the basement shop, and I'm getting back to this project, which is the Walter 10-inch, but actually it would be metric, made in Germany, rotary table. So I will start by trying to disassemble it, although it's partially disassembled now. In the previous clip that was pointed out. I do not know why these screws, there's 8 of them, actually there's one missing, that go in there. Why they were removed, nothing appears to be loose because of that. So maybe somebody just took this apart and was going to clean it up, and that there is nothing really wrong with it other than the tabletop here is pretty well mutilated, but I can work around that. So the emphasis today will be just to start on the table itself, because it's already disconnected from the rotary base. You can see. And I'm going to derust this. Now, I've been talking about derusting for years, and here's a good practical application of that. So I'll put the lower part on the floor and out of sight and out of mind for a little while. I think I told you while this was still in the garage that the worm down here moves in and out on a cam, and that is to be the movement is to be controlled by this big knurled ring here, and that was frozen solid. So using this web wrench, and you recall me buying this rigid wrench for $1 last summer at a garage sale, well, it sure came in handy because it's got plenty of leverage. It's made of aluminum. But anyway, I did get that freed up. So one less thing to do. Now, repeating myself again, this will go down on the floor out of the way. But before I do that, let me point out that some time ago there was coffee can full of parts when I got this. T-bolts and a few screws and so on. And I already did derust those a while ago. Now I forgot how I derust. I've got so many different products here on this bench getting ready for my Olympics of derusting that I forgot what I used on it, but I guess that's beside the point. If you look at the table from upside down now, you can see that there's no rust or corrosion underneath here, because in fact this was bathed in oil. There's an oil sump, and presumably it had oil in it, not when I got it, but so I don't see any rust there, just a little around the rim. So what I want to do is to derust the top. So I'm going to take it, put it in this oil drain pan that I had out in the garage. I cleaned it up real well. And we'll let it set for a day or two or whatever it takes. Now I had decided, or had not decided, on what to use, because I got all these different potions here for the Olympics. There's vapor rust, but I think I'm going to use the citric acid. And according to the directions that somebody gave me, it said take 8 ounces of citric acid to a gallon of water, and I think I'll use warm water. I bought this citric acid, I believe it was on eBay. 5 pounds in there. And hey, did you see where recently the man that invented these red Dixie cups died? You never think of somebody as inventing a cup, do you? So let me get that prepared, and this happens to fit just nicely in here without too much waste like you would get in a square pan. So it's going to sit in there like this, but I need to get it up on just some little blocks or something so that the potion gets to the rusty area. And I'm only going to put enough fluid in there to cover the rusted area that I showed you. I'm not going to let the fluid come up into this part of the casting or the gear. That's really in good shape. Okay, the citric acid is in a gallon jug here of warm water, and hopefully this won't take more than a gallon, and I don't think it will. The table is suspended on a couple of rusty rods, so we'll see if the solution takes the rust off of the rods as well. And then that looks pretty good, and I think it took about 3 quarts, it feels like, maybe a little less. And I'm going to put some of these rusty bolts here and the other parts that I just took off down along the edge here. And even this thing, it's plated, but it's got rust on it. We'll see what that does. Now this is going to set for 24 hours, and we'll take a look at it and then determine if we need to put it in there a little bit longer. Over in that shoebox lurks those chisels that I put in there about 3 months ago in the molasses. You could use molasses for this too, but that's only for young men who have lots of time. But when you're in your 70s, you're not going to live long enough to see that molasses work. Oh, I know I'll get some trouble over saying that, because, you know, everybody's got their favorite method of removing rust. So if you dare insult them in regards to their method, they are highly offended. But I'm kind of neutral. I go with all these different methods, but I've never done citric acid, and I've never done oxalic acid, which I intend to do someday. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, I'm back, and it is not the next day. It's been about 12 hours, so it's still the same day. And I'm going to kind of get this out of here. Boy, it's heavy. And look at this. Take this old toothbrush. Wow, that rust comes right off. I think I'll take it over to the sink and do that. Now, one mistake I'm sure I made is I did not degrease this before I put it in. Now, I don't think there was much grease on the T-slot end, but down here there's certainly a lot of grease, but then again I'm not really removing rust down there. So I'll take it over to the sink now and scrub it good with my fingernail brush. It's the next day, so let's take a look at this. Now, I call this a 10-inch, but in fact it's metric since it's made in Germany. By the way, here's a little quiz for you. What company, famous company now defunct, used the Powercraft label on their tools? But using a metric ruler, it is 25 centimeters in diameter, which is fairly close to 10. I'll probably end up calling it 10. But now that it's been cleaned up, and then immediately there was flash rust, so I have cleaned it a little bit with wire steel wool. Didn't take much at all. And then oiled it overnight. You can see the extent of the damage now, which was largely hidden by the rust, but we got pecks from a drill here and here and here. We've got the breakouts, which I talked about, and even some semicircular slots here. So this was used by some pretty brutal people over the years. Also, now that I have cleaned up the slots, and I think I got a little more work yet in the slots because there was so much oil and grease in there, and I should have degreased it before I started this, and I realize that now. Or I knew that, but I was lazy, I guess. But anyway, somebody took out these 8 cap screws here in an attempt, ill-fated attempt, I might add, to remove the gear and so on. But from the back side here you can see pins, and they're probably tapered dowel pins, but that person didn't know how to get it apart because these pins from this side are were pretty well hidden by dust and corruption. I'm not going to take it apart, but I'm sure that they would get driven out from this side. But there's no need for me to do that at all. Look at how nice the graduations show up now. Very nice. The T-slots, of course, will be metric. So this piece is essentially done. I'm going to go ahead and put the cap screws back in, but I think I told you that there are several missing. When I had the tabletop in the solution last night, I told you I set it on something, and this is what I set it on. These studs were, which was part of a clamping kit that I had, but they looked this rusty, although that's kind of superficial when I put them in there, so they cleaned up nice. Also, this handle cleaned up pretty nice, but there is so much pitting on the chrome, and that will never come off. But the rust itself is pretty much off, but this is rougher than a cob. And then I will take this today off camera and put it in the solution of citric acid and clean it up good. This was a bugger to get off. I did have to use my Craftsman puller, and most of the plating is gone. This thing may have been recovered from a junkyard, I'm not sure, but whoever was working on it just gave up, I think, and hopefully this is still a viable, good table for me. Getting back to the condition of the table top, although it's in pretty rough shape from machining and these holes, actually that is not going to affect the thing. If I were to put you know, a relatively large piece on here and clamp it down, as long as there's no high spots, and I will stone this ever so gently to make sure there are no high spots, it'll be perfectly accurate. Also, while I was looking for a metric ruler a while ago, I ran into these rusty plane irons, just for the heck of it, I'll throw those in the citric solution for a few hours. Generally, these holes in here that I've dealt with in the other rotary tables I have are a Morse taper, but this one is cylindrical. It is not tapered, and it is in fact 40 millimeter. Now the larger hole here is an odd size. It's a little bit over 45 millimeter. It's 45 and change, so I don't know why that is, unless maybe somebody at one time opened that up. But the reason I'm mentioning that is that these holes here are what I use when I am setting up a rotary table to center it on the table of the milling machine. So I'll probably make a plug for that. You've seen me do that in other videos. The answer to the quiz, of course, is Montgomery Ward's, the big catalog merchandiser out of Chicago, now defunct, started by Aaron Montgomery Ward, and he started this catalog company before Sears did. And I used to like the Monkey Ward stores. My dad always called them Monkey Wards. Now when I cleaned these up, I cleaned up nice, but look at the pitting on this one, which still won't function it, but hurt the function, but it sure is eaten up by rust, isn't it? And there's nothing you can do about that. Now on the keys here, these are the keys that would be used to hold the rotary table onto the table or to align it. I don't really see the need because you got to align it anyway, but there they are. But I just tried them on the Bridgeport, and they are 5/8, so they were made up probably to fit on a, well, no probably about it, they would have been used on a Bridgeport. These are a couple of T-nuts, and whoever made these used imperial size. That's a 3/8 16, so I need to make up some more of those. I'm not going to show that because, well, even those are pecked away by a milling machine. So anyway, I'm not going to show how to make these. There is a video on that, not for this table, but no matter how you make them, it's the same. You make a whole bunch of them in a row and chop them off like sausage. One more noteworthy item on this table is that this is an oiler. In fact, it's a little ball oiler. Am I going into too much detail here? Little ball oiler, German version of a Gitz oiler, I guess. But it is connected with this oil hole, which in turn allows you to spread oil right here on this surface, and those are oil rings here, because that is what it is. Of course, it's upside down. It's riding on this surface, so you want that well oiled. So that's the method of oiling it, distributing the oil, and so on. I got to clean up these grooves just a little better, but I thought that's pretty awesome also. The oil gallery, of course, is connected to these other two oil holes as well, so it's a complete oiling system on the top side. Then, if I may, you can see that the surfaces I just showed you that are oiled ride on this rusty surface and this surface here. So that's how that's oiled. Now, as I start on the lower part here, this is really a mess. And I believe I'm going to spend a lot of time degreasing this before I attempt to rust it, and derust it, and I may need another container to hold this thing, but this, of course, is the oil sump. I guess I talked about that, so that would be filled with oil, but I need to try to get this apart if I can, and I'd like to get this out and then proceed to, I think that is supposed to be a sight glass for the oil sump. So I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but you see there's a fair amount of rust on the bottom, but that's not too critical, and this is where the keys go. That'll clean up just fine. So that's my next project, and I'll attempt to take that apart without showing you, because that's really not the purpose of this video. Let me show you just a couple things about disassembly here, and I'm no expert at this, but I've done quite a bit of it. But to start with, I wanted to get this dial off, and it wasn't going anywhere. It's been on there since the Blitzkrieg, I think. So in the way, of course, is the key. And, well, first of all, I took these two set screws out, and those weren't easy to get out either, but I did judiciously use my impact driver, and they gave way. Now, to get the key out, and the key, of course, this would be metric, it's rounded on both ends, so it's not going to slide out, nor is it a woodruff, which you can tend to rock out. So it was just in there straight, and it wouldn't budge. I tapped it a few times, but eventually I got the bright idea of taking my drill press vise, and what I did was to clamp it as tightly as I could across the key, and then with it in this position, tapped it a few times with a lead hammer this way. Wouldn't come, it would slip off because there isn't much to grip onto. So then I heated this up. How hot? And this is hardened, by the way. I didn't want to take the heat treat out of it, and I really got it, I would suspect, about 400 or 500 degrees. Way too hot to touch. I did it again, and believe it or not, it came out, and I said a thank you prayer. Then, to get the graduated collar out, there was just nothing to pry on. This was all the way up against. So I took some brass, this piece of brass as a matter of fact, and putting it right here, tapped on it. Eventually it moved enough as I worked it around to where I could get my wedges on there, and I've got these wonderful wedges. I almost forgot that I had them, and they are beryllium copper, and I'm going to say something in my next this and that video about the dangers of beryllium copper. But with these wedges, and I don't want to damage anything. You know, it's like the Hippocratic Oath. Wasn't the Hippocratic Oath stated such that a doctor should do no harm to the patient? And then, using these from both sides, you can see that she's coming off. And I did use a little of this miracle. You know, it breaks loose faster. It's magnetic. It's revolutionary. It's concentrated. It's fabulous. And powerful. And what else? Oh, it's the high flash point formula. What a bunch of baloney, but it worked. The more I get into a project like this, the more I wonder, why am I doing this? But there appears to be some parts missing, including a shaft or something that goes through here and holds the table on there. It's probably got a threaded nut on the bottom. I'm just deducing that. If anybody knows for sure, let me know. Although I might be done with the project by then. Now, I just loosened up these 3 screws, and they gave away after using my impact screwdriver, but they were good and tight, and there's plenty of corrosion in there. And look at the inside of this collar. Not real good shape. So I'll take those 3 screws out and see if this comes off. And off came this, using wedges and my brass persuader and a little persistence. And there was a hidden pin that I didn't know there, so it was kind of rocking as I took it off. Now let me tackle this. This is an interesting piece. I took these two screws out, 1, 2, and what happens when you tighten these screws, it pinches this. You see this little groove here? Gets pinched on both sides and locks it. And it wasn't too tight, but using my Armstrong spanner, I was able to then get that off. And then behind that, of course, is the worm. This is the shaft that has the worm on it. German ingenuity. I know there's really no need to show you all this, but part of the reason it's a video documentation for myself to try to get this thing back together in case it's a month from now. But taking this piece off, then there was a little pin here, right there, and that pulled right out with the Bernard pliers. And there's another pin down at the bottom, and that's an oil groove. Another pin underneath the shaft here you can't see that goes into that hole. So kind of complex little deal. Now off to the side here is, I think, a broken bolt. Let me move the camera over there, and maybe that's why they quit with this or scrapped it or whatever. I was able to get this handle off once I got the knurled collar off, but you know, this wouldn't swing. So now that unscrewed, came off. That's really the lock for the eccentric. Remember, there's an eccentric here. It's still stiff enough to where I can't operate that, but that's what moves the worm. I should say engages and disengages the worm into that where is it here? Ring gear. So the E is for, I think, engage. The A for disengage. Makes no sense. Anyway, with that broken off bolt or whatever it is, and this might have been a set screw, I can't tell because it appears to be wallowed out. But I don't know what I'm going to do about that. I wish I knew what its purpose was, because I'd like to get the whole worm out this way and it won't budge, and I think that is the problem. I know this is a bit of a non sequitur because I'm really doing this, but these are the plane irons that I put in the solution just, what, 2 hours ago. And all I did was scrub them for 10 seconds each with my fingernail brush, and look at that. Now these stains, of course, aren't going to come off. I don't know what those are. I think you all know what a plane iron is. And there's a Stanley Sweetheart. Some people think are collectible. Okay, so I'm going to take some of the bow shields and spray them and rub it on, and we'll see if that preserves them for another generation. I'll rub that in real well. That's all I'll say about this.